Well, I guess here we are, beautiful Kingston Peninsula, the old museum, where the old jail used to be. And we're here, I guess, history. History, I like to say another way to say gossip. History is when you find out something, someone tells you a narrative of something. History is something when you share things by wit. And when you look back at history, you make judgments on what to talk about. Sounds a lot like gossip. So I'm just saying, history is just a fancy way to say gossip. And I've got some great gossip for you today, growing up here. So since we're here in the museum, what used to be the jail, you can go to Hampton now and find all that out. But here in the jail, there was an awesome man, funny man, maybe a criminal man, depending on how you look at it, right? Gossip. Henry Moore Smith. A Moore. I wonder about that. But Henry was here a couple times, locked up in the jail. This man has uncountable escapes from being caught by the sheriffs on the way back to jail, escaping, when you're supposed to be going to court, escape from jail numerous times, cutting chains, breaking chains, faking your own death. In this area, there was a window to the outside, and the community kids and some of the adults would come down and watch this man in jail, because this man in jail fashioned these like puppeteered things. I always envisioned it like Charlie Chaplin, doing little dances and telling stories. Now I'm picturing, when you think of a criminal, you don't usually picture your kids going down to watch the criminal through the window, do stories and plays and songs that were entertaining. This man was. Very interesting how he'd make his escapes, sometimes put the horseshoes on the horse backwards in order people track and think he's going this way and he's going that way. Times he'd hide out with the natives or the Indians. He blended. I find that interesting. But faking his death. So, in my adopted family's history here in the Kingston Peninsula, all the way back to the Loyalists, we had doctors in the Paddock Street in St. John. So there's 9 generations or 9 different Paddocks who were doctors. And one of the doctors came in, and Henry Moore Smith was here. The minister came over watching this happen. The jailer watched it happen. He had inflamed bowels. It'd be violently retching. It'd be, excreting blood. Go in and out of consciousness for times they use salt or something smelly to bring him back to. So much so that he convinced the minister and the jailer that he needed to write a will. So this man's been caught, escaped several times. This time he's in jail, did some puppets, and now faking his own death. The doctors come, say, yes, he's dying, his bowels are inflamed, he's going out of consciousness. Asked the minister to pray for him before I died. He wrote a will leaving his money to the jailer's son. But told them, don't take the money yet, just leave it here until I go. The minister, for sure thought the man was going to die. Didn't think he should die in straw. So he sent his slave, Canada, Kingston, slave Amy. Not so much a slave, more like a noble, kidnapped freedom fighter, prisoner of war. Anyway, sent Amy back to the rectory just over here to get a feather mattress so he could die on. So when she comes back with the mattress, finds the doctor and the jailer, they're all tripping out because this man just disappeared. They were sitting somewhere. The man got up, got his clothes, got his money, got his stuff, got out the door and gone before they knew what happened. Crazy. Great gossip. On top of that, the sheriff here was Bates, Walter Bates. He wrote this book about Henry Moore Smith, The Mysterious Stranger. #read books. Mysterious Stranger also has another book called The Lunar Road. I bet you some of you all go to Fredericton to the Lunar Road pub and eatery, get yourself a few beers down, celebrating Alpine, New Brunswick, or Moosehead, or what you got in Keiths, Nova Scotia. Anyway, Lunar Road is a story about Henry Moore Smith. So is this book. But Walter Bates, the guy who wrote it, was the guy who caught Henry a couple times, locked him up. He's mad as heck. This guy faked his own death and got away. Henry ended up in Ontario to the relative of Walter Bates' house. Befriended the family, got invited for dinner. So Henry Moore Smith is in Ontario at Walter Bates' relative's house. eating food, saying, I'm a younger brother from back in Kingston. Wrote him a letter, gave him a letter, send this back to your brother. Tell him I said hello. So, this guy who faked his own death, convinced the doctor, escaped several times, horseshoes on backwards, ends up at the cops' family's house. Like, what a dig, what a dig. Tell your brother Henry says hello. It's Henry Moore Smith. Beautiful Kingston Peninsula. Crazy story. Great gossip. Further on, the minister guy I was telling you about, Scoville, came on the loyalist ships, or back in 1783 on the Union sloop into the creek. First church, oldest Anglican church in New Brunswick or Canada, whatever. The Scoville, first minister. It was like 90 plus years of Scoville's ministering, almost a century of ministers. Bring the word of the Lord to the community. Also a whole bunch of slaves, unfortunately, but not slaves, honorable nobles who were stolen and kidnapped, Holocaust survivors, and prisoners of war. But anyway, so the minister, he has some slaves, and then, back in the day, I used to get these photocopies, researching this information, because where you live is cool. Finding out who you are and how you belong is cool. But at one time, the minister, John Macpherson, is quoted in the newspaper saying that there was a skull found in the basement of the rectory. Now, we know that the blacks weren't allowed to be buried in the Anglican burial yard, so the stories always said that it was babies, some couple of black babies or honorable, noble, kidnapped babies were born or buried in the basement of the rectory. My mind's blowing. I'm growing up here, going to church. I mean, his name's still up on the front of the church, in the stained glass, Elias Scoville and his son Scoville. But I was like, wow. 100 years, slaves, buried in the basement, skulls. When the black loyalists came out to Kingston and did their service at the Trinity Church, 20-some years ago with Dr. Clifford Skinner and many other moving people of our community, it was said that they got shackles out of the basement of the Trinity Anglican Church, and I think they're in the possession of the Black Cultural Center in Nova Scotia. But speaking of the history, I'm like, okay, so we're in Canada. We got the religion coming on. We have the slaves coming, buried in basements, escapes, runaways, hiding with the natives, horseshoes on backwards. And then one of the Scovilles, this first guy, he left his slaves, honorable nobles, to his kids. So, passed down like all the horrible things, but I'm not trying to accentuate that, but I'm just trying to tell you the story. So the slaves passed on to the son, and that son went on to Belle to minister up there in an old place called the Pearson House. Boom! Kings County Memorial. More of the Kings County Historical and Archaeological Society. But super dope. I mean, like, in Belle Isle, New Brunswick, Canada, there was slaves that came from this minister to his son, that minister, and it said that outside the house, there's a cave dug in the hillside by the right of the house with a tunnel connecting the cave to the basement. Here in the cave, a number of black male slaves slept and could come through the tunnel to get their food in the basement kitchen. I mean, growing up, I'm like, this is crazy. You're telling me in New Brunswick there's slaves and caves and tunnels underground and bodies under rectories and breaking out of jail? And I'm like, museums and histories are dope, man. Like, super exciting. Can be shady, can be hard to swallow, but like all good medicine, sometimes it's Buckley's. It sucks, but it works, right? But I'm like, yo, Scovilles, what's up? Wife and I went here, check that out. Crazy story. But also in that Trinity Church, I don't know if it's the first, but I understand the first black woman minister in that church married the first black-on-black couple in this church with Aboriginal drumming, the Egyptian maid of honor, and Bob Marley for the closing hymn. So I'm trying to say, since 1783 to now, we've been holding it down and we're doing it big. So don't get it twisted. We're learning from the past and we're going to the future. And we're kicking out anybody in the way who ain't trying to be changed along with us. 2020, clear vision. But yes, So crazy stories. Caves and tunnels. Or down in the creek, the Maliseet canoes were coming down, flying the flags of war. The last time, I believe, the last time an American flag was flown in war in Canada was where? Here. Just down there, down the creek. Now, I believe it was the American flag with the 13 stars representing the 13 Indian colonies on how they expatriated. But anyway, flags of war flown by Maliseets downriver. Stopped on the beach called Indian Beach. Peace treaties made. War not fought. Great story. I suggest you research that one yourself. Also, further down, it was called Akmenik. Probably slaughtering it, I apologize, but Akmenik, or Caton's Island. So Caton's Island was known back in the day as like a brothel. It had a name, it was like Ile de Grace or something, meaning a place where men could go get women. Well, I'm just telling you, it was like just the 1700s Jeffrey Epstein Island. People would come someplace, they're Vikingish. They were, what's that, Thrones? Game of Thrones-ish. Very violent. But anyway, so you're telling me in Kingston, bodies buried, there was like a brothel island where captured natives would go so that the loyalist British could have minglings. I'm like, crazy history. Growing up here, if you're one of the only people of shade or hue, sometimes it can be hard to deal with. So I'm going to break down some of these stories and show you a positive face so we can left, right, into 2020 so we can see better. But anyway, brothel islands, crazy. Jeffrey Epstein ain't that different. I'm telling you, stuff been going on. Other stories, more gossip. Henry Walker. So Henry Walker was a brother around here, late 1800s, who sent oranges. You couldn't just go to Superstore, Sobeys, and get oranges all day, every day. He would get oranges when they would come in, probably in the ports to St. John, and come out here and give oranges to the kids around the community, probably where the markets were at and at the stores. Because getting an orange, when you ain't had an orange in 10 months, huge treat. So that's a brother back in the day, even though it might have been hard at some times, good in others, giving out oranges, benefit, healthy food, vitamin C to the community. So when the Carter House Tea Room reopened, I got to dress up as Henry Walker, and I came with my basket of oranges and my fancy top hat to represent that. I'll tell all sides, but I'm always going to be telling smiling also. So that was cool. That was a great story of Kingston that I like to share. Also, Henry Walker had a brother or cousin, Abraham Beverly Walker. Now this man, Kingston Peninsula, again, and these people were indentured servants, nice way to say slaves, what I'm calling genocide victims. Anyway, were indentured to my adopted family. So digest this. Some of these stories I'm telling you, my adopted family's descendants had as right. But I'm one of people who the land is being inherited to, so I'm talking about self-administered reparations. But anyway, Abraham Walker somehow ended up at the National University in Washington, D.C., had to do with the Supreme Court of New Brunswick in 1881, part of the African Methodist Episcopalian Church, politics, writing journals and books, articles in the States talking about the Negro problem and how to deal with it, had his writing beneath, which was connecting us to Egypt. So this man in the late 1800s was writing and speaking of how the black descendants here had lineage to ancient Egypt or to ancient Kemet, and also calling us the children of Israel, the lost tribes. So in 1881, we had a brother from right here, indentured family stuff, to my family, talking about us being blood lineage to Kemet, Egypt, and to the tribes of Israel who went from Egypt to the west coast and then a lot over this way, if you're tracking with me. So this whole Nick Cannon stuff, this is nothing new. I'm talking about this in the 1880s by brothers here, suit and tie, G Money Boys. Abraham Walker, do that, first black lawyer. Loving this man. Oh yeah, boom. The author of this book was here in this museum last year. I came down to see the man writing about Abram Beverly Walker, the lawyer, the lecturer, the activist. This is here. This is us, and this is our story. Everybody dies famous in a small town. It's great to be here. Now, many other of these stories tied us here. Like when I was speaking to the Maliseet canoe coming with the American flag with the 13 stars, or representing the native colonies. Now, as the stories go in my family, there was Walkers who were black, and then they listed Sally Walker, who wrote in some of Abram's publications, was a white lady. I was looking for the picture, didn't find it, but when you look at the picture, I'm 100% putting my money on what we call native. So the issue of white, native, black, what that means, what your identity is, has been a melange ever since, ever since ever. So we had the Maliseet and the Mi'kmaq folks. I mean, the Mi'kmaq in these areas, speaking of their copper scrolls, 20,000 years old. The copper scrolls with the writings and the etchings, that of ancient Sumer. That with the languages that connects to Sumer, Babylon, and Kemet. Speaking of the language of resonance, the Mi'kmaq speaking of our language needs to become one of kindness and compassion and happiness, and not just love. We've been preaching love for a long time, and love is absolutely wonderful, but we don't love everything. There's some things we don't love, and when we look at our historic teachings and our elders, we can learn even that which we don't love, we can be kind to, we can be happy around, and we can be compassionate with. These stories are all snapshots of how through pain, suffering, laughter, enjoyment, and growth, we can find these kindness stories, these kind acts, or the compassion in order to hear someone else's side that is a different gossip or a different history than your own. I grew up in this Anglican church. I was trying to find out if the Anglicans, whose leader is the royal family, is the royal family of the Bible. Because I'm going to church trying to find this information out, because I'm trying to find out who I am, and these people are saying, Joel, you're from ancient Kemet, you're an ancient Israelite in Seeking Salvation, Canada, Lawrence Hill, movie, the Black Church in Canada. Who are we? How do we connect? Do I belong in this church? There's a slave master on the wall. You had bodies in the basement. How do we go into this 2020 with our vision ahead? I see lots of places, statues coming down, signs coming down, names coming down. And it's interesting, because we have a couple names on the stained glass, pictures of the man up on the wall. It did come down for a while, but it's back up. But kindness, compassion, and happiness is what we're aiming for. This is why I come to the museum here on the Kingston Peninsula. This is why I get these books of my brothers and sisters who are greatly influential in our lives and who write from all our perspectives on all our days which we are born here, so we can all seek some salvation, so we can find out who we are. Who are you? My name is Joel Nathaniel Macpherson, birth name. I like Babalui Anu Shabazz Allah, self-appointed name, or Dr. Carbon, the medicine man, because names have meaning, and what you're called affects how you live. Change your name, or say it with conviction. Be strong in who you are, and live your gossip. I love you, from the Black Rose Nation.